and get started. So today we're going to talk about chapter 5, and I'm going to do our slideshow, and you can just ask questions as we go. If you have a question about that particular slide, and then when we're done, we will talk about, take questions about the entire chapter, really sticking to that topic of interrupting the negative cycles. And then when we're finished with that, we'll take a little bit of time to answer just more kind of general questions that you might have about this work. So let's go ahead and get started. So, I'm assuming that since you're in the book club, you have read through chapter 5. So what I'm going to do is kind of summarize some of that information, but then kind of give some added insight or more in-depth insight to what you've already read. Make sure I'm putting, yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to be following along in the chat as we go. All right, so this is chapter 5, and it's interrupting your negative cycle. And I just added here, the communication end game for these cycles, the two ways, ultimately, everything kind of circles back to getting out of it, meaning either interrupting it or preventing it, is just making more space in your relationship for vulnerability and healthy assertion. And as we go through the book, we're going to talk more about that, but just keep those two words in mind, because that's really everything that we're doing here is getting better at expressing and holding vulnerability, and expressing and holding and responding to healthy assertion, which some people might say, the word boundaries, or being very clear about needs, very clear communication. All right. So again, we talked about this last time, the negative cycle, or these patterns of communication that couples get stuck in, where, someone gets triggered. These triggers usually aren't just out of thin air and isolated. They're not just about the moment at hand, but they're also about relationship history, and even history from, your past, in the partner's past. And then so they get triggered, and then they act on the trigger, not with vulnerability or healthy assertion, or sometimes even in a perfect way, right? It doesn't have to be an unhealthy way to trigger your partner. Maybe they have their own stuff. Whatever happens, they then get triggered, and then they act on their trigger with words or behaviors in a way that then lands on the original partner in a not so helpful way. And then they get re-triggered, and then you start going back and forth. And most couples will have one or two predominant patterns. It's going to look the same regardless of whatever topic that they're talking about. And so we don't want to work on just kind of resolving every single topic in the right way. When we're doing relationship work, we want to work on stabilizing these patterns first, because the pattern has to be stabilized before couples can ever expect to find solutions to their problems together, whether those problems be related to, logistical things in life, or their emotional relationship or sexual relationship. Okay, and so then just to really quickly recap, because I know most of you already know this information from the last chapter, but we have this protest and accuse, and then that from partner A over here, and that causes partner B to feel all these bad things, and then they get angry or anxious or have some urge to take action, and then they do, any number of these moves with their feelings, stuff it down, get quiet, try to fix it, get mad back. Well, that doesn't land well on this partner who was already triggered and trying to be heard. So they get more upset, and then on it goes. And another example of more specific information is, partner A somehow sends a message of failure to partner B. You're failing. You got it wrong. You did this wrong. Either they're, not deliberately, but either they're obviously sending a message of failure, or partner B picks it up as a message of failure. Either way, partner B, now I feel misunderstood and unseen. That makes me anxious, insecure, and maybe angry. And then to not feel anxious, insecure, and angry, I have to defend myself. But then I'm now in that protective place, trying to take care of my own needs. I've now left your needs, and now I can't hear you. And then they show up in a way that now, leaves partner A feeling like, well, I had something important to say, and now I feel completely dropped and neglected and invalidated. And that causes more insecure, anxious, angry, or angry. And then they go back into their move, and on it goes. Okay, so given that you understand this concept, now we need to figure out, well, what do we do with this, right? Okay, it's one thing to know we have these negative cycles. So there are kind of 3 steps to managing negative cycles. One is just preventing them to begin with, learning to create this attachment-friendly environment in your relationship so you go there less often to begin with. 2 is to repair them when you do have them. Like, oh, yep, we messed up. Let's figure out what happened and make a repair so we can learn from this experience and learn more about each other and what we can do better going forward. And then the third thing is learning how to interrupt them when they do happen. And I start in the book with interrupting them because my assumption is that all couples are going to have cycles, negative cycles. We don't really ever, most couples are never going to fully escape them for lots of good reasons. Life is a work in progress, and sometimes we're tired, or resources are low, or we have triggers in our relationship that are we haven't dealt with before, and our capacities for coping get overwhelmed, and we don't show up as our best self. So for whatever reason, couples are going to have cycles from time to time. And so my job first, I think, is to help couples interrupt it when it's happening, kind of like triage. The interruption is kind of like the triage work. Okay, so again, you can't always prevent them, so we got to know how to interrupt them here. And the first step is just recognizing when you're in one, right? Usually, most people, it's fairly straightforward, but not always. So how do you recognize it? Well, you got to pay attention to different signs, right? For some people, it's going to be you just feel that feeling in your body, like that kind of nervous system reaction. If you notice that you're going back and forth, right? You're kind of going back and forth, and maybe things are starting to escalate a little bit, and then that's a really good sign that you're in it. If all of a sudden you're in a lack of warmth and you're communicating from a place that's not so warm, not so connecting. Something must be going on with you that's blocking that warmth and connection. And if whatever it is going on with you has to do with the relationship and the message that you're currently getting from your partner, really good sign you're in a cycle or heading for one. If you have like an irritated feeling or an angry feeling, any kind of painful feeling that is kind of about the relationship, but not getting directly addressed, is probably getting acted out in the kind of words and behaviors that define a negative cycle, or can go there relatively quickly. If you're feeling like you're communicating and you feel kind of disconnected or an urge to disconnect, for some people, it can feel like kind of a drained feeling or a tired feeling. That's their body kind of collapsing because all of a sudden I'm not feeling safe anymore and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And instead of their body going into activation and do something, their body does the opposite and goes into just kind of collapse and escape inside. Now, why is that a negative cycle? Because if that's you or your partner and you go into that place, now you're sending the other partner a message, I'm not here, I'm gone, I'm out, I'm checked out, and that's going to trigger them, and they're not going to react to your, collapse with, oh my goodness, what's going on? Are we in the cycle? If they don't have that skill, instead they're going to react to their feelings of abandonment in that moment. So you're not really going to probably be able to escape the situation by collapsing. So again, we have to replace that move of disconnection with leaning into the connection with vulnerability or healthy assertion. That can be, again, part of that, like overwhelmed disconnect is kind of a deflated feeling. And again, it's not that any of these feelings are wrong. It's not wrong to feel irritated or angry. It's not wrong to feel disconnected or anxious. It's wrong if you're not talking about it in the right way that doesn't go into a negative cycle. That's when it becomes, I don't know if wrong's the right word, but not productive, bad for the relationship. So again, none of these things are wrong. It's how are we going to go forward and communicate when all this stuff wells up? If you have an urge to start launching in and fighting back and protesting or defending, that's a problem. Hurtful words. If you're finding yourself there, you're in a cycle. Sometimes there's just tension in the air. Sometimes the cycle isn't so much in an active state, but there's tension in the air that you're acting out on. You're distancing from each other. You're being passive aggressive to each other. You're avoiding each other. That's more of an avoid cycle that will probably turn into a more escalated cycle later because the tension is eventually going to reach a point where it gets addressed. Okay, so one of the things that you can use, kind of in your mind to interrupt the negative cycle and then put words to it, is using this idea of this anatomy of a trigger, which is really what's going on inside of me right now. Whoops. Okay, we're here. I'm feeling some of these things, right? Some of this is going on. Let me just kind of check in with myself and organize myself here and kind of figure out what's really happening for me and maybe what's really happening for my partner. And let's get some new words to that, right? Instead of going down that path where we're not really consciously seeing it and it's just sort of taking us over and we're just kind of launching into our moves, scrambling for safety without any intention there. Let's back up. Let's use this information that we now know called the anatomy of a trigger, or whatever you want to call it, the concept of whatever's happening inside of your body and your attachment system and organizing that. And then now putting words to that. Okay, wait, hold on. So again, the anatomy of a trigger. This is what's really happening in these cycles. All couples are seeing when they're not consciously aware of these patterns, both between them and inside of them, is they're just seeing this part. Okay. And if you're just seeing this part when you're interacting with anyone, it's not going to go well. Okay. And so we really need to get more awareness that, something else is happening. Maybe if we stop trying to just do this and we start trying to address and communicate about this, we can get somewhere here. So we have this triggering event, your partner's late again, or your partner is not sticking to the budget, or your partner is putting their, extended family, you perceive they're putting their extended family above you, or they're, not parenting in the way that you feel comfortable with. And so, you get triggered or they get triggered. And then we have these unmet attachment needs, Okay. So that's, I need to know you're going to be there for me when I need you. I need to know we're a team. I need to know you can see me and understand me. And then, those aren't met at the bottom of the barrel here. And then that brings up painful feelings, despair and sadness. I feel betrayed. I feel defeated. I feel really alone. I feel sad. I feel disconnected. And then, you're going to go into these fear and powerlessness and fear of the future, fear this will never end. And then that's when your body is going to want to take action, right? That take action says, ouch, this stuff hurts. And then that's when you go up here and start doing these behaviors in an attempt to get this stuff feeling better. So part of interrupting these cycles, and a part that cannot be skipped, is just having a strong conceptual knowledge of what's actually happening, not only within yourself, but understanding what's really happening with your partner, and them being able to also understand what's happening with their self and with you. And that's the first, when I'm working with a couple, this is the first phase of the therapy, is just getting this information really solidified. I need before I'm going to go forward with a couple into the deeper layers of the work, I really need for them to each be able to verbalize, when I hear this from you, this attachment need goes unmet, and then my body goes into this vulnerable place, and then I get scared, and that's when I try to just tell you what you're doing wrong, or that's when I just pull away and disconnect because I'm trying to just escape from the pain of all this. And when they can really clearly see how this negative cycle is playing out and what's going on within each of them individually in the cycle, then they're ready to, start moving into the deeper stages of the work. And it becomes much easier to interrupt what you can actually see to begin with. Okay, I'm going to answer your question, Angie, but I'm going to wait here because I want to stick with the slide, and then we'll move into kind of more specific or more general questions. Okay, so one way to interrupt it, just kind of a basic way, when you're really just learning this stuff, is just to name the cycle, right? Just to say, oh gosh, this is it. This is our cycle. That starts to externalize the problem from, wait a minute, hold on. We're not really enemies right now. There's this cycle going on between us, and let's just, see it for that right now. Take a step back. If you are going to name the cycle, it needs to be done with safety instead of you're in the cycle, or see, when you do this, that means we go into a cycle, or, it's your fault we're in the cycle, and just kind of go back into, hey, let's not let this cycle win, right? It's not you hating me. It's not me hating you. We're both triggered. Something important's happening. We both have something important to say. Let's not let this negative cycle beat us right now. And then the other, kind of basic interruption is to take a break from it, right? Because here's the thing, if your nervous systems are escalated, probably, unless you're a couple that is really good at co-regulation, which is going to come kind of later in the book. If you're a couple that doesn't quite know how to do that so well, and you're just learning this stuff, it's probably better to take a break than to go into these cycles that can, you're risking creating more trouble and damage in the relationship if you go down that road. So it is important to take a break. I know this is very hard because a lot of times the more anxious partner, the more avoidant partner is taking, they're more comfortable with that break because that's their way of escaping. Whereas, and then that kind of leaves the anxious partner feeling abandoned. So we have to do it in a way that's safe. So the goal isn't to escape. The goal is to put a pause on it that we're going to come back to. If the goal is to escape, that's really just another iteration of the negative cycle. I'm just trying to escape. And then the anxious partner has to, be willing, their work is to be willing to trust we can take this break and we'll be able to circle back to it. And I need to be able to kind of hold my own emotions right now, in the service of taking this break instead of going into that fear place where we have to resolve it right here and now. But it's not just about taking a break. In that break, there has to be something happening that, is going to help us come back together and communicate about whatever important thing it is that put us into the negative cycle to begin with. Because if we just push that under the rug in the break, obviously it's just going to keep popping back up. Okay, so here's a good thing to use use when you're in that break period is reflecting upon what I call the reframe. Okay, so when couples are disorganized and they don't know, and I don't mean disorganized attachment, but when their fights are disorganized, when their conflict is disorganized, and they see it as, well, if you would just do this differently, then we'd be okay. If you just would do this differently, we'll be okay. And they're not really able to see clearly what's really happening in these communication cycles. They do tend to go into this protective, we're enemies of each other place. And so the way out of that is the reframe, that this is everything I'm teaching you is the reframe. No, that's not actually what's happening. What's actually happening is this negative cycle that is fueled by all these unmet needs and pain that we're not able to communicate about in a healthy way and reach each other over. That is really the problem. And so here's kind of a little scaffold to help you get your brain into that reframe while you're taking this break. This is the work that needs to be happening in the break. When I get the message, then I feel, which makes me, and then I want to, so I can feel, which sends you the message. Now I'll go over it more specifically in a minute. And then do that for yourself, and then do that for your partner. Imagine what's going on for them, if you can. And that when you come back from the break, when you can communicate, when your head's in this space, A, you're probably going to be more regulated, and B, you're going to have something else to talk about, to reach each other and connect with each other and feel safe with each other, so you can start doing things in a new way, which we'll learn more about in the following chapters. Okay, so here's what it might sound like. So when I get the message, and here's the unmet attachment need, that I don't matter to you, whatever it is, that I'm not being understood or seen by you, I feel, and then we have the vulnerable part of the anatomy of a trigger. I feel alone. I feel afraid. I feel disconnected. That's a painful place for me. And then my body responds to that by getting anxious and angry. And that's my body trying to, take action, do something. It's my body telling me, take some action here to make this, to get away from this pain. Again, because I'm anxious and angry. And what I want to do to not feel alone, afraid, disconnected, and all this stuff, I want to protest to get you to see what you're getting wrong. That's the goal, right? The protective urge follows the protective and reactive feelings. I'm trying to offset all of this. If I can just protest and say the right words and get loud enough, or get rational and intellectual enough, and put the right evidence out there enough, and I can just get you to see what you're getting wrong, then you're going to change what you're doing. It's the function. You'll be like, oh, I hear you now. Now that you're saying it so loud, I can hear it. Or now that you're really, laying out this really beautiful logical argument, now I really see what what you're saying, and now I'm going to change, right? A lot of times, sometimes that might work. Okay. Sometimes that works. And there's a lot to be said about that if it does work, but, for better or worse. But most of the time, if we're in a cycle, it's not working. But if you'll just change what you're doing, then I'll get to feel safe and secure. That's the need. I'm needing safety and security. I'll feel better. I won't feel alone. I won't feel afraid. I won't feel disconnected. I won't feel unseen. I won't feel dropped or misunderstood or betrayed. I'll feel safe and secure. However, when I'm doing this, all I'm really doing is sending you the message that you're failing or you're misunderstood or you're being invalidated or you're being unseen. So that's really recognizing what the impact of, you have good reasons to do this. And here's all the good reasons, not working reasons, but still, it makes sense if you don't have any other way in your life to get your needs met that you would try to go here. However, we also do need to recognize the impact on our partner. So then we repeat for them in our mind. Like when they get the message that they're failing, then they probably feel bad. And then they get all worked up and then they try to blah, blah, blah to get me to change so they can feel safe and secure. But then I get the message and then we just keep going back and forth. No, Tracy, Tracy says, is the fill in the blank reframe in the book? I can't find it. No, it is not in the book. This is just a little extra. I will have one up on the website. That is something you can print out. But yeah, this is just extra. There's so many different things that people can do to get out of these cycles. This is just one twist on it. The goal ultimately is to get you in the headspace of what's really happening instead of what's not really happening, which is we're just trying to randomly hurt each other. And this is one way to get yourself into that headspace. What can I do differently as someone with unmet attachment needs? Well, what you're going to have to do differently is figure out what those attachment needs are, that aren't met, from your past, and figure out how am I going to get those needs met now, right? As an adult, now I'm walking around. I didn't get these attachment needs met in my childhood. I don't know how to meet them myself, and I'm not getting them met in my present relationship. Okay, we can't go to the past. We can't change anything about your childhood. Those needs were unmet. However, now you can learn to show up for yourself and start meeting your own attachment needs. And you can learn how in your relationship to create an environment that's going to increase the odds that you can start getting those relationship attachment needs met. And of course, that is also going to rely on your partner's ability to learn how to help you learn how to meet your relationship attachment needs and get theirs met. And that's the relationship work. But so again, we can't go change the past of the childhood, but we can kind of grieve through some of that. We can learn to show up for self now. Part of showing up for self now is dealing with your own emotions in healthy ways and meeting your own needs and learning how to behave in new ways when those needs and all that pain gets activated. And then the relationship work. I'm almost done with the anxious attachment, which is also appropriate for disorganized attachment course that I keep talking about. I'm really getting close to getting this done. And that's going to deal with that middle part of showing up for self, which a lot of people that grew up in homes where they did not get their needs met have no idea how to show up for themselves. And that really is, you cannot separate that ability to show up with self from the relationship work. Relationship work requires that you can first show up for self. I'm going to see if any of these have. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this out, which I think it's finished. I'll go. That's for next week. All this is for next week. Okay. All right. So that is again, I didn't go over every single thing from the book because I wanted to kind of add some supplemental information to what's in the book. So highly recommend you go into the book, but this is just a little more twist on it. And now I will go ahead and let's answer some questions about specifically about interrupting the cycles. Someone says, what does self-regulation and sitting with one's feelings look like in practice? And what is the impact of that? Okay, so there is a part of that in this chapter of the book. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna do more on chapter 5 next week. I'm dividing chapter 5 into 2 because I felt like it was so much information, and you guys have so many questions that it's hard for me to get to all of it in this space. So I wanted to have time to really thoroughly address it all. So, self-regulation and sitting with one's feelings. Okay. So sitting with one's feelings, again, that's what I do in this course. It's a lot. There's a lot to be said about sitting with your feelings, a ton, right? It's not a simple thing. That's why I really, because in the work I do with people and in my practice, I'm really teaching them to sit with their feelings by over and over and over walking them through that. And, it's really hard to put that information into a book, right? So hopefully in this course, I'm doing that with people, walking them through it over and over and over again over the course of hours. But here's what it looks like. It looks like really being able to, first of all, access the feeling in your body, right? You got to be able to find it. If you're not accessing your feeling in the body as it's alive and working with it alive, you're just talking about it or thinking about it or whatever conceptually. Doing feelings conceptually has limited value. Working with feelings as they're alive is where the real healing is. So the first step is just feeling it. Okay. Now we got the bodily sensation. It's a hot feeling. It's a clenching of my stomach. And we're going to sit with that. We're going to sit with that experience. And then we got to start naming it. We got to give it some feeling words. It's a sad feeling. It's a scared feeling. But I don't want you to end with sad or scared. I want to get more specific with that. Scared of what? Sad about what? Sad that you feel ignored, sad that you feel defeated, sad that you feel alone, right? And all of these more nuanced words really help bring the experience to life. So you can have the feeling in your body, learn how to slow down, okay? Because if you're not slowing down with those feelings, you're just going to act out on them. So you're going to sit there with them, and then you're going to, figure out, listen to those feelings. Okay, I do feel kind of defeated right now. And when I feel defeated, that's a real sad place for me. I can feel it in my body. And what is that defeat needing? What is that loneliness needing? Well, we can assume that loneliness is needing a feeling of connection. Defeatedness is needing a feeling of being empowered over your own, your own well-being, or being heard, or whatever it is that feels defeated. And then you have to kind of, get more clear about what that's needing. And once you have a little more clarity and you're able to listen to it and figure out what it's needing, then it's like, well, how can I show up for that need? How can I show up for my feeling of being alone, right? Maybe I need to just sit with myself and not abandon myself in this place. That's going to help that place feel less alone. And then now let's take it to a relationship level. What am I needing in my relationship to offset this pain? What's a better way to go about getting those needs met in my relationship than just kind of launching into these negative cycle moves? What do we need to do together to get there? So that's it. I mean, it's just, again, you got to slow down with it. You got to find it in your body. You got to organize it, name it, make sense of it. It sounds so easy when I'm just kind of putting it out there like this, but this is why, sometimes you need help with someone who knows this process really well to walk you through it over and over again. So you get, more competent with doing it. And then the more practice you have, the more it just becomes just a normal, natural reaction that you have, which is really what happens when people grow up in environments where they have a little more help with their feelings. It just becomes natural to them, and in a, they might not consciously go through all these steps. Sometimes as adults, when we're learning things as adults, we have to clean it up and make it more organized. So because it's not just rote. What if you are getting better at interrupting a negative cycle and you make a pass, but your partner does not get it and continues in the same vein to escalate? Okay, and sometimes I do this as well. So now, once we understand this negative cycle is happening and we understand some moves to interrupt it, what happens when that doesn't work, right? Because that's also a reality. It's not always going to work if you say, let's take a break. It's not always going to work if you say, oh, this is our negative cycle. So now we have to figure out what the blocks are, right? What's blocking it from working? So you're saying in this situation, your partner doesn't get it and they just continue. Well, I need to understand what's happening with your partner that they're not able to get that. Is it is it something to do with your delivery? Is it something to do with the way they're interpreting their delivery? Is it something to do with the fact that something is triggering them about the fact that you say, hey, this is a cycle? It doesn't take them to a place of safety. Instead, it makes them feel unsafe and then they keep going. What is it about that that's unsafe? Again, is it your delivery, or is it the fact that when they hear, your delivery is as perfect as possible, but when they hear we're in a cycle, they hear we're in a cycle and you're to blame, or whatever, something about those words aren't safe for them. That's where I would want to know what happens. Let's, later when you're not in the situation, you might want to go in and say, hey, listen, I know we go into these cycles, we go into these cycles, and we got to figure out a way to interrupt them, because wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to keep doing this over and over? One of the ways I know that's, I'm trying is to kind of name it so we can do something different. But something important comes up for you, I can tell, because when I name it, that doesn't seem to land well with you. So help me understand what happens there. Right? Can I say it in a new way? Can we learn new ways to kind of try to reach each other in ways that feel better? Or is there some meaning around the negative cycle that doesn't help you feel safe that we need to talk about here? So again, if you don't have a professional helping you work through whatever these blocks are, then you got to learn how to have those conversations with yourself, with each other, to work through those blocks. And blocks are all the blocks to the healthy way working are going to be rooted in one of two things, or a little bit of both, which is one is the intra-psychic blocks, the stuff for you as an individual that you bring to the relationship. Each partner has going on inside of them that's blocking them from responding to healthy, or from delivering healthy. Or the other type of block is what's happening in the relationship. How are we communicating with each other? That's causing a block. And so my job is to help couples work through these blocks. And again, in the service of helping them talk about their blocks. So that's a good conversation to have. Open that up. Hey, what are our blocks here from doing the healthiest thing in these comment? I find even with a third party, unless each party is all in, this is a huge hill climb. A good third party is not going, that cycle will not be happening, that they will be the third party. If they know what they're doing to stabilize negative cycles, they will be really helping the partner that isn't all in be understood and feel safe, and kind of exploring around what's going on with not all in. You have some good reasons to not be all in here. Help me understand, helping them, because ultimately that's their anatomy of a trigger. All in is the behavior. I'm kind of staying distanced from this because I've had stuff coming up in me that it doesn't feel safe to be all in. So that's what the third party is there to do, is to process not all in, which is the exception to the negative cycle. So I'm going to keep answering the question self needs in the same way. It's showing up for yourself. It's a big concept, and it's being able to access your feeling in your body, being able to talk to yourself in a new way, being able to put words to your feelings, being able to sit with them instead of just trying to escape them, figuring out what these feelings are needing to be healed, figuring out ways that you can start approaching your painful needs in your own personal existence to help them be met. There's so many different ways to show up for needs. The first thing we have to do is feel the pain and figure out, like, listen to it. You might need to do body work to help yourself. You might need to do better just physical self-care in the world. You might need more support in your life. You might need more spiritual work. You might need to learn how to, do breathing exercises to calm your nervous system. But it always is going to start with feeling the pain, making sense of the pain, and figuring out what this pain is trying to communicate to you. That is the opposite of just having it be there in this vague way and acting out on it in all these ways that aren't working in your life. How can I interrupt a negative cycle and regulate myself when I feel dismissed or triggered? If the dismissal keeps happening with every emotional need, what's the way forward? Okay, so, all negative cycles are going to involve feelings of dismissed or triggered. That's why they're negative cycle. You wouldn't have a negative cycle if you're not feeling dismissed or triggered. So now we have to figure out, what is that dismissed or triggered needing? What is dismissed needing? It's needing to feel heard and understood, right? That's the opposite of dismissed. Dismissed is unheard, misunderstood, and not responded to. That feels bad. So just first of all, getting clear about what that is what unmet need is in dismissed, what pain is in dismissed, right? Now you got to be able to kind of show up for yourself there. Wow, this dismissal feeling really hurts. In my life, I've felt dismissed a lot. It's a painful place. Let me just sit with that for a minute and be there with that, and not just rush over that feeling. Let me just feel some of that in my body. Give it some space. There's some sadness there I need to sit with. I need to give that some space. Now I need to figure out what needs to happen in my relationship so that I don't have to keep circling back to this dismissed feeling. What's going on? How are we communicating with each other that keeps circling back to this? What is my partner doing or saying that takes me there? What am I doing or saying that takes my partner to the place that they then go into their place that leaves me feeling like this? What are we both doing in this cycle that's ending up in me feeling dismissed and them feeling XYZ? Okay. So if you're doing that work, right, and you're still, circling back to dismiss, that means you guys aren't able to get out of those negative cycles. And so you got to keep, doing the work, figuring, coming back to each other and continuing to say, we get stuck in these cycles, and I'm still going to this place where I'm needing to be heard and understood by you. How can we make that happen? You're still going to this place where you're needing to be heard and understood by me. How can we continue to work to make that happen? Now, a lot of that work is going forward in the book. So I'm not going to put a lot of that information out here now, because we're just in this part where we're learning how to kind of triage and interrupt it. But the skills going forward in the book are how couples can get out of these cycles so you don't keep feeling dismissed. Now, maybe you're saying, what happens if no matter what we do, we can't get there? I'm still walking around the relationship feeling dismissed. Well, that's another conversation for later, which is, what are you going to do if this work isn't working? Our efforts aren't working. Just think of it like, if you have, I don't know, some kind of physical problem, like, allergies or something, and you have this set of interventions that you can use to help your allergies. You can try medications. You can try avoiding certain foods. You can try all of these things, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean any of these things are going to work. We can increase the odds by trying different strategies. But ultimately, if the things we're trying aren't working, we need to figure out a plan B and keep figuring out what we need to do. Sometimes that's accepting and learning to live with things not being perfect. Sometimes, when it comes to the relationship, that might look like maybe we need to break up. Maybe we're not going to be able to meet each other's needs. But the book is kind of designed to help you put the work into practice, and we will, as we go, learn more of those skills. Great questions, though. Let me see if we have any hand questions. Okay, I know it's important for avoidance to feel like they're succeeding and getting it right. But what if they have done something that is actually disappointing and a huge letdown as your partner? Well, that is, wanting to get it right and feel successful does not mean that a person doesn't do things that aren't successful. The two aren't mutually exclusive. We can want to feel successful and still be behaving in ways that aren't going to get us there. So, first thing is, what is this partner doing that is not successful, right? Well, how are they contributing to the fact that they're not being successful? What do they need to do differently to send messages that, show up in the way that helps you feel safe? Okay, so I need to look at their role, and then I need to look at the partner's role in them not feeling successful. Is the partner sending messages of not being successful that, maybe need to be balanced out with? If we're going to talk about the negative, we also need to talk about the positive. How can I help the partner deliver this information that is going to be the most productive? And then, what is it about if your partner is kind of letting you down or messing up or showing up in the negative cycle in ways that aren't working? What is happening for them that it doesn't end with, oh, my partner's expressing a need, and my work in the relationship is to kind of figure out how I can work on my end to help them get that need met. Why does it go to, oh no, I'm an abject failure? Okay, so I would want to know more about that. Why does normal, appropriate relationship concerns take them into a shame spiral if that's happening? So again, I'm working with both sides of the equation, but the idea that I don't want to feel unsuccessful does not mean that they're not behaving in ways in the relationship that aren't working. So the second part of your question is, how do I confront that in a way that allows you to feel how to confront that in a way that allows you to feel and honor your disappointment, but doesn't make them shut down and respond with, I can just never do anything right for you. Okay, great question. Again, what if that is theirs, that no matter how perfectly you deliver the information, they are going to shame spiral? That is their stuff that, could come from their past of, negative messages growing up, that you get something wrong. It doesn't just end with you messed up, let's fix this. It goes to, you are wrong. You messed up because you're a loser. You messed up because you're bad, whatever it is. So I would want to work with what's going on their end. But the way that you would, confront that, some ideas of how to do that would be, just putting really clear words to that outside of a cycle when things are safe, which is, hey, listen, we're in this relationship together, and we're both going to, part of being in a relationship is working to, meet each other's attachment needs. So both of us feel safe and close in the relationship, and we are going to let each other down. That's just part of being in a relationship is sometimes we're going to let each other down. And there are things that we're going to need to talk about that aren't working. But what happens is, what I notice is if I talk about the things that aren't working, then that pushes you into this place of, well, I'm just an abject failure. And then you feel bad and like you're a failure. And then I feel bad because I'm not, getting my needs heard and held. How can we kind of get out of this thing? Like, what do I need to do differently to deliver my concerns to you in a way that helps you feel like you're not just being defined by your failures, but what do you need to do to be able to tolerate my disappointments and be more open to your work to help with that? And one thing that is super important is learning to take turns, right? Which is we're going to have to take turns here, right? I'm going to make space. I'm going to hear your concerns. You can talk to me about, any feelings that you have walking around the relationship, like you're just, no matter what, you're getting messages that you're a failure. And I want to tell me about that. I'm going to be here. I'm going to put my own trigger to the side and I'm just going to hear you. And I'm going to, validate where you're coming from and really try to understand where you're coming from and be open to what you have to say. And then we're going to do that with me. I need for you to kind of be open to me expressing what's going on with me. And that's when you have the opportunity to say, I need to be able to reach you with disappointments that it's a normal part of relationships. And when you kind of, go off into your, I'll never get it right spirals, and I feel abandoned. Okay. So it's, kind of what I'm saying here is naming the problem, figuring out as a team how we're going to go forward with fixing this so we can reach each other with concerns. And that is the opposite of a negative cycle. Okay. A negative cycle is you saying, look, here we go again. Every time I bring up a concern, you just kind of shame spiral. Do you see the different ways that I'm dialoguing around that? It's like, here's what's going on for me. I have this, when I feel unheard, that's a bad place. And we need to be able to reach each other. And then that piece about taking turns is huge. Taking turns will get people out of negative cycles. And we'll talk about that more as we go deeper into the book and learning the skills. I guess I struggle, and the last part is, I guess I struggle with addressing my own concerns and disappointment because it sends my partner into shutdown. Yeah, see, that is a problem. You need to be able to have space to, in a healthy way, express your concerns and disappointment without them going into shutdown. So again, taking turns, communicating about how that's impacting you, and also giving them the space to talk about what they're needing to not have to shut down, what they're needing more of in order to be more open to your concerns and disappointments. Again, a big one is, if I'm going to hear about the bad, I also need to hear about the good, what I am doing that's working for you, because your partner, you have a right to be able to express your concerns and disappointments, and your partner has a right to also get plenty of messages of where they are being successful in the relationship. How long is a break? And for the anxious partner, what if the avoidant uses it as an opportunity to let it blow over, or has fear of bringing it up and not coming back to it? Breaks, I think anywhere from 20 minutes to a day is appropriate, depending on the unique circumstances. There's no right or wrong answer. Sometimes things might need longer. I like the 20-minute as a minimum because that's how long and I don't know for every situation, but that's the minimum amount of time it takes your nervous system to kind of settle in. You need that 20 minutes to kind of tap into yourself and be like, okay, what's really going on with me? Organize the experience with the scaffold I gave you, which is, when this happens, then I feel let down, and that takes me to a painful place. And, then I want to just kind of go into that cycle and start launching into my partner and telling them what they're doing wrong and what might be going on with them. What might their part of this be? What vulnerable feelings are getting tapped into for them? Now, if the avoidant partner is using it as an opportunity to let it blow over. That's not the work. That's not the break. And this, when I say break, that's not really what we're, a healthy break. That's just more avoiding. If the avoidant is using it to avoid, that's part of a cycle, right? That's just another way to be in the cycle. And so I would need to know like what's getting in the way of that partner using the break to also tap into their own stuff. And the fear of bringing it back up needs to be talked about. What's so scary about bringing it back up? And what might happen if we don't come back to this? What are you trying to avoid here? Because whatever it is, it makes a lot of sense. And I want to know more about that. Please help me understand, why it's safe for you to just kind of move away from it and really be there and be open to hearing about what their resistance is. Really validate that, really show up for that. But then we got to switch over to here's what it's like for me when we have these concerns that never really get addressed. That leaves me feeling really alone with it. And that's not working for me either. So we need to figure out a way to do this with each other where, I'm honoring whatever you need to be able to come back to it. And you're honoring whatever, but it's actually both of our needs to come back to it. How can we, when we come back to it, how can we help each other feel safe? What are we needing to feel safe getting through it? Okay, I have just started listening to your book. I have been in individual therapy for a year and a half, not a trauma specialist, but very helpful. My partner is just now beginning. I feel like he can't see or won't see how he is having his own trauma responses. It makes me feel like this is just not going to work. How do I wait for him to catch up? Well, the first thing I would do is just try to, do your part. I talk about this later in the book. I don't know how far you're into it, but there's a lot of value in just doing your own work to not continue to react to your own feelings in ways that aren't helping the relationship. We can't always control the way other people are showing up, but we can certainly work toward controlling how we're showing up with our own feelings, how we're responding to our own feelings. A lot of times when you're putting that work in and you're handling yourself in a new way, the tension in the relationship starts to stabilize and the air clears out and space opens up and safety starts to take hold. And when safety starts to take hold and people get out of their protective stances and their nervous systems settle, they do become more open to self-growth. What gets in the way of self-growth is a lot of anxiety that can be rooted in relationship things. So if you can do your work to kind of minimize that anxiety, and it's not all your work, but your part, that can, stimulate your partner's desire to start growing too. And that can start shifting those conversations. One thing that you can do is I wouldn't ever try to convince someone they have trauma responses. That's probably not going to get you anywhere helpful. I would stick to whatever when you say trauma response, what does that look like? Is it that they're yelling at you? Is it that they're completely avoiding you? I would focus on that behavior and sharing with them how you're impacted by that behavior instead of necessarily trying to make sense of it. You might do that later when there's more safety in the relationship, but it's like, hey, when you pull away, here's how that leaves me feeling, right? Like I'm really working on not, getting amped up or not saying mean things or whatever it is on your end. I'm really working on that. I don't want to do that in our relationship anymore. But, also when you just kind of shut down and stop talking, then that doesn't land on me really well. I end up feeling alone. And since I don't want to go into these negative cycle behaviors anymore, I just kind of have to go off and be sad. And I don't like that. It's disconnected. Can we work on that? That's very different than you have trauma responses and you need to work on them. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is I would, move away from telling them that this is trauma responses and lean into kind of trying to understand what happens, what's going on with them. I mean, if we want to stick with the word trauma response, maybe you could say, what does it mean to you when I say those words? It sounds like those words really don't land on you well. Can you help me understand, like, what happens to you when you hear me say that? And give them some space to talk about what they don't like about that and then validate that, which is, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. If, I'm saying the word trauma responses and you're hearing me say your childhood was horrible and you're broken, I get it. I get why that wouldn't feel good for you. That right there, I know that's hard because, when you say you have trauma responses, you're trying to say, and please heal from those so we can feel close and connected. And it seems counterintuitive to instead lean in to their resistance around that. But that actually is the work, is creating more safety, creating more understanding. You might not agree with it, right? But at least trying to understand where they're coming from. That is safety building. And then that is going to maybe not show up right then and there as a cure, but over time, when they feel heard and understood, guess what people want to do? They want to start hearing and understanding. It opens them up to it. Is there a guarantee? No, there's never a guarantee in no relationship advice ever out there in the history of all relationship advice has guarantees to work. We can only increase the odds, and leaning in is one way to increase the odds. So I would just give it some time. And, of course, if you're leaning into them, that needs to be balanced out with eventually them being able to lean into you, right? But if your partner is the one not reading the books and unfortunately they have some sort of block to it, the only thing you can do now is to work on your side for a while. And if weeks or whatever go by and you're standing there going, there's been zero shift here, then that's another issue to have to look at. How does this intersect with the issue of one of us finding feelings of intimacy and safety through sex and the other needing feelings of intimacy and safety to be open to sex? Well, that's the classic stalemate. So that's a conversation, right? What's going on here? And I would want to balance this out with, well, first of all, if you talk to your partner, if you guys take turns, right? And let's say you start and you help your partner express what it is about sex that helps them feel safe and close, right? The way that you might be talking about it is in this cycle way, which might sound like, well, I just need sex. I'm a man or whatever. That's how I feel. Or doesn't have to be a man, but that's just how, I feel good in the relationship is to have sex, and you never want to have sex. And if you'd have more sex than this, and then you start going, well, I need emotional closeness and I don't want to feel open to sex if I don't feel emotionally close. That's a negative cycle. So I would take turns and I would say, help me understand what is it about sex that helps you feel close, and get them to put some words to that. Maybe sex is a way for them to feel accepted, for them to feel like they can be successful. There's all sorts of met emotional needs in sex, right? It's not just about the physical piece. It's about feeling loved, feeling accepted, feeling like your partner's showing up for you. Okay. So if they're going to talk about what they're getting from sex, now they are emotionally engaging, right? And if you can stay with that instead of just criticizing them, if that's what you're doing, I don't know, but instead of just criticizing them about their need for sex, if you can kind of stay with them and help them put more words to what sex actually means for them and how it helps them feel good and connected, not only one, are they now engaging with their own emotions, but now they're engaging with you emotionally. And now, bam, you're getting some feelings of real more verbal intimacy, right? You're getting to know them a little bit better. And then we don't want to do the flip side, which is if you're able to kind of sit and be like, this is what verbal connection feels like to me. When you're telling me these words and we're spending time together and we're holding hands, I feel accepted. I feel held. I feel loved. I feel valuable. That's what that means for me. And then I feel filled up. And if they can do what you did for them and lean into that and go, wow, that makes a lot of sense to me. I see how that helps you feel close. Look, here we are in the same circumstance where we're both wanting to feel the same, valuable, connected, all these things. Like our needs matter to each other. And now, again, in that conversation, hopefully you're both feeling more intimate, and that will open up the space to maybe feel more open to sex. Oh, in the book, you wrote a short break could be 5 minutes. Is that too short to be effective? Thank you for bringing that up. I did change my thoughts on that because I heard after I wrote that, I heard someone say 20 minutes for the nervous system to relax. That made more sense to me. 5 minutes if it works, if it's not a huge trigger, fine, 5 minutes. There's no hard, fast rules, but I do think 20 minutes is probably more appropriate because it just gives you more time to settle your system and really tap in and say those magic words, what's going on with me right now and what might be going on with my partner right now. But thank you for asking that. Okay, we have Angie. I think, Angie, this was your original question. Okay, first of all, Katrina, chat me if we have anybody who wants to come on.
We don't right now.
Okay. Okay, so Angie says, thank you for all you share. Your book and podcast have made a huge difference for my husband and I. I'm so happy to hear that. It's so good to know it's making a difference. And I'm really just very happy that you're feeling better. I relate to the anxious and my husband relates to the avoidant. When we are in a cycle, he will try to validate what I'm feeling with a single sentence said in a very flat tone. Then there will be a lot of silence as I'm still feeling hot, and he'll repeat the same sentence in the same flat tone. Any suggestions of what to do at that point? Keep the process going to de-escalate and repair. Yeah. So the first question I'm going to ask as the therapist is, what is getting in the way from him emotionally engaging from his word? I mean, emotionally engaging along with the words, right? So probably that means that he's not emotionally engaging with himself. And when he doesn't know how to emotionally engage with himself, he's going to have a hard time understanding what's going on with you because he doesn't understand his own inner world. And if he can't understand what's going on with you, then it is going to be hard to help you emotionally. And so he's trying, though, when he says the words, that's his way of trying to help. He just doesn't have quite that connection of, oh, it's in him. It's like, I know my wife's hurting and I don't want her to hurt because I love her. And so I have this list of instructions and I have these words. And if I say these words, she'll feel better. And we want to move that from that into, oh, she's feeling unheard and invalidated. I know what that feels like to feel unheard and misunderstood. That's a bad place. I remember feeling that in my life. I don't like how that felt to feel bad and misunderstood. And I can empathize with where she's going. And so now we have that felt sense of emotion to combine with the words, which is, you know what? I'm really sorry. I get that. I felt that before. It doesn't feel good. And I'm sorry for my role in that. And I really can understand where you're coming from. Maybe I can't, but I'm willing to really try to understand because I don't want you sitting there feeling unheard and misunderstood. So what do we have to do to get there is he needs to be more emotionally engaged with self, meaning he needs to be able to kind of tap in, recognize what happens to him when he gets messages. What happens in his body. We got to get him into that body place. If you've watched the podcast or listened to the podcast, that would be kind of what I did with Drew, is just help him learn to emotionally engage with himself so that it's not just putting out the words there. However, I would make sure on your end that you are at least responding to the fact that he's trying, right? There's a lot of opportunity there to help him emotionally engage with himself just by saying, hey, listen, I really appreciate that you're actually willing to put these words out here, right? Can you help me understand, like, why are you using these words? Why are you using these words of validation? Well, because I want us to not fight. Okay, that's really helpful. What about fighting doesn't feel good for you? And then see if we can open that up to, it feels disconnecting. And, then maybe saying, okay, yeah, you don't like to feel disconnected. Sounds like that's a painful place. Now he's emotionally engaging, right? Or you might say, have you ever felt invalidated in your life? Have you ever felt misunderstood? Try to get him kind of into that place of not feeling heard and understood on his own. Anything that's emotionally engaging for him is going to help him see you more emotionally. And then, of course, the flip side of that is for you to be able to, give that, again, if we're going to talk about what they're getting wrong, we need to talk about what they're getting right. Kind of give that, hey, I see the growth just in the fact that you're willing to move out of your old cycle moves and at least give me those words of validation. And there's something really helpful in that. At the same time, I know that we need some more emotional connection. And what would help me feel good is to know that those words are kind of being accompanied by some empathy there. And, that's what's going to really help me feel close and safe with you. So how can we get there together? And hopefully, he's able to really hear that and take that in and be responsive to that. Okay, my partner lies a lot, probably about even more than I already know. I don't have proof. Because I don't have proof, he denies it. I notice that it makes it hard for me to be open because I never know whether I can trust what he says. It probably is part of his avoidance pattern. So I do get kind of where he's coming from, but I don't know how to deal with it. Can you comment on that? Well, yeah, that's not okay behavior. And if it's ongoing, there's just no way that you're going to be able to feel safe and close in the relationship with a partner who is chronically lying. So we have to know the first goal is that the lying has to stop. And that needs to be communicated in a really clear, direct way. And I wouldn't rely on proof. If you really know, if your body knows, and you really do, you've really used a lot of discernment and you've really, thought about it and worked on your own stuff, and you really have gotten to the place where you're like, look, I know he's lying. I do. I trust that. It's not me just, being paranoid or whatever. I know that there's some lying going on. Then I would go to him with that and say, look, I believe that you're lying, and I believe it enough that it's getting in the way of me feeling safe and close. I wouldn't try to prove anything. I would just trust yourself and be really clear. This isn't okay for me. It has to end, because it is not possible for me to feel safe and close in a relationship where there's dishonesty. And so we need to figure this out. First of all, we got to get him owning the behavior. If he's not willing to own that he's lying, there's no way to get around that. Okay. So we have to somehow figure out a way to say, look, I need to go forward here. I need to know that you're with me in this and that you're willing, that we can work on this together. I'm willing to work with you here. But I gotta know that you're able to own that. So we can do something about it, because it is not working for me. And, then from there, we have to understand what's the lying about. Why you said it's part of his avoidance pattern. Definitely. What is he trying to avoid? Why is it safe for him to lie? What about this is his stuff? What might you be contributing to the relationship that might be setting up a situation where he's needing to lie? You can't, that doesn't mean you're at fault for him lying. You can never make someone lie, right? However, you might be doing stuff on your end in the relationship that's contributing to an environment that the symptom is lying that he's choosing to do. What might you work on? There's all sorts of personal and relationship work that can go on when the symptom is lying that can help. But we can't get there without ownership, and we can't get to ownership without really clear communication of this isn't working. And then, of course, if this goes on and on and on, and no matter what you do, you're still in a relationship where there's dishonesty. At some point, you have to recognize, why am I staying in this situation where I can't feel safe and close? Like, why am I not either getting out of the relationship or getting to a place where I just find a way to accept that, this probably isn't going to change? Like, how, I guess that's a tricky thing to say, but it's like, how can I help myself? I'm going to be really clear with myself that I'm in a situation with someone who really maybe isn't willing or ready to work on that. What do I need to do to take care of myself if this really isn't changing? But step one is trusting, I would say, trusting yourself and being really clear. This just isn't working. I don't need proof. I don't want to get into, getting in the weeds. My body knows, and I'm not going to be in denial about that anymore. Kind of holding them like very clearly accountable. Thank you, Amber, for that feedback. Okay, someone says, I hear you, Julie, about validating your avoidant partner's concerns instead of calling them out on their trauma response, but it is so hard when you're dealing with your own pain, triggers, and wounds of being invalidated and dismissed. How do you show up without getting offended and put that pain aside to communicate without feeling triggered and getting defensive yourself? Okay, really good question. How do you put your own triggers to the side and show up for your partner? Both partners have to be able to do that. There's no way around being able to do that. Now, part of being able to do that, to put your stuff to the side, is confidence in the fact that at some point you're going to be heard too, right? So this is when partners can really come together and say, hey, we've got to figure out how we're going to take turns here. It's much easier for me to put my stuff to the side and lean into you if I know I'm going to get that in return later. And it's going to be much easier for you to be able to hold what I'm saying if you know you're going to get your space later. So first of all, it's just setting up some structure around that, right? That's just relationship structure. We're going to create this time for both of us. That helps your nervous system trust. Structure promotes trust. And then, if you set this up and you're still finding, no matter what, even if I know later I'm going to get my needs met, no matter what, I still can't put my triggers to the side. That's your work. We got to figure out what's getting in the way that you aren't able to tolerate your own stuff in order to stay with your partner. What's getting in the way of that? I don't know what it is because, there's different things for different people, but that's the question is, what is getting in the way? Why is it so hard for me to tolerate and be open to what they're saying? What's going on with that? Then I would go into that anatomy of the trigger and try to organize yourself and kind of try to figure that out. And then that might be the thing that you need to be held around. That might need to be the conversation of, let me just tell you what happens for me, why it's so hard for me to stay with you when you're in this place. The way you're delivering the information is landing on me in a way that I feel kind of attacked, and that makes it hard for me to be open. So can you work on that? Or it's hard for me to hear your concerns because I grew up in an environment where concerns meant I was just, stupid or a fool or bad or dumb or whatever. And it really is hard for me to stick with that. That then if they're able to respond to that with, hey, that makes sense to me. I really hear that. I really hear why, you get so triggered and have a hard time being open to me. That's healing. That's a healing conversation. Same thing on their end. What is getting in their way of their delivery when we're taking turns, right? Why is it that expressing themselves, their safe way of expressing has to be in this kind of attacking or shaming way? Maybe that's their work. And so, is part of your inability, it's just working through the blocks, right? It's saying, hey, we got to have this structure. The end game is that we're able to take turns, lean into each other with, like I said, we're using vulnerability, we're using healthy assertion. And if we're not able to do that, something is wrong, and we need to figure out what are the blocks here. Again, you with you, what are my blocks? What's creating this difficulty tolerating it? Is it something about my own stuff? Is it something about their delivery? Okay, so working backward. And we also have to recognize that even though it's so hard, you can't have a good relationship until both partners are able to do that. I keep hearing the language and different phrases that you are using in your examples. In the moment, it's hard to use positive language. Do you have any suggestions on how to remember the right words to use when trying to address different subjects with my partner? Yeah. So later in the book, we're going to learn more of that. And then in chapter 13, I think there's a whole chapter on words and phrases. And it's less about the words and phrases, the specific words, and more about the elements. The fact that, and I go over this later, what this even means, but we want to use elements of speaking from self instead of you this, you that. We want to use vulnerability instead of you don't care about me. It's, hey, I start feeling alone. We want to use validation of their perspective, leading with that. Hey, I understand where you're coming from, this, and this at the same time. So there's all these, it's again, it's less about the words. And if you try to remember the principles instead of the words, it's much easier. It does take practice. If you grew up in a home where you learned all these ways of communicating that just aren't healthy, it is, if that's your language, it is kind of like learning a new language. The upside of learning the new language is better results. There's no mandate that you have to, but if you don't, then you risk kind of getting stuck in the same cycles over and over. So, again, that's not so much for now. That's more for later. And I know that's hard because to interrupt a cycle, you do have to have better words. But right now, I'm trying to, in this phase of the book, sort of, again, triage it, just kind of, let's just not let it get so bad. Let's do some damage control here. And then later, we're going to fill in that damage control with diving deeper into the healthy strategies. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple more here. Any suggestions for an avoidant cycle and the break? We both often don't want to come back to it. Okay, well, if you don't come back to it, it will come back to you, right? Unresolved issues maybe they'll go under the rug for a while, but they will continue to flare either in the same topic or the pattern in a different topic. They will cry to be met, to be taken care of. So just know that. So maybe the conversation with each other is, look, we can either choose to address this topic with intention, or we can wait for it to flare back up and blindside us. So let's come together. Let's talk about this. What's getting in the way of both of us wanting to dive in and talk about this? What about this cycle that we get stuck in feels so bad that it's better just to avoid it? And open up that conversation. That's just opening it up. And if you can't get to that point, then it's what's getting in the way of me being able to say those words, right? Your partner can't say them either, but since you've got you to work with, I would first go, what's happening on my end that I'm even afraid to go to my partner and say, hey, we need to start working on this stuff intentionally instead of letting it just come up on its own. And I would go into the anatomy of the trigger, right? Which is, what am I afraid of if I bring this up and try to open up this conversation? How is that going to make me feel? What am I afraid I'll end up feeling? When I get afraid about what I'm going to end up feeling, what do I do? Oh, that's when I just shut it down and don't bring it up. What am I trying to do? Well, I'm trying not to feel pain. What's the downside of that? Well, the downside is that the pain's going to end up coming back anyway. So what do I need to do to to get myself in a place where I can be vulnerable and take that step? I can take that risk. There's a saying in my line of work, no risk it, no biscuit, meaning if you don't risk, you don't get the good results from the risk. For you and your partner, the risk is leaning into the conversation, even with your scare, even when you're scared, understanding more about that fear, putting words to that fear, and then really recognizing how is this fear, how I'm trying to regulate this fear by avoiding, how's that getting in my way? How's that getting in my partner's way? How's that getting in the way of our relationship safety and closeness? Okay, so what if you do set up the structure and are willing to put your trigger aside to hear your partner out, but you still feel anxious and fearful in your body because your partner hears you out later, says the words that you need to hear, but never follows through on the actions or resolution, and now your nervous system is wrecked? That's the conversation. The conversation now is to confront the fact that the words aren't being followed through with actions. That's like, I'm needing you to hear this. Like, we've found ourselves in this situation over and over where I hear you saying, hey, you know, you hear me and you're validating me, and that feels so good. But at the same time, we keep circling back to the same behaviors. These are the behaviors. You want to be clear about what those behaviors are. And we're going to have to figure something out here, because what happens is I can't really trust your words if they're not being followed through with. And if I can't trust, then I can't feel safe and close. And if I can't feel safe and close, you're not going to feel safe and close. And like, this isn't working for us. So that's the first step, is just putting words to that and having confidence that that's real. That's healthy assertion, is having confidence in that, not allowing them to say, well, that's not true. I do. And say, no, hold on. I am not getting messages that this is being followed up with. I need to know that there's going to be some results here, that there's going to be some change. I've got to see some change. Let me tell you how I'm impacted by the fact that there's no change, right? That's their job, is to be able to say, you know what? I see that. I see how me saying the words, but then not being able to follow through with it later can leave you feeling afraid and alone. That makes sense to me, right? That's okay. So now we got to figure out what's their block to follow through. Why are they having a hard time with that? I need to know. I highly doubt that they don't want to follow through. If they're saying the words, they probably do, but something gets in their way that they don't have words for. How can we help them get words to whatever it is that they're blocked? So we have to know, they need to know how you're impacted. We need to make space for understanding what's getting in their way, and how are we going to work together, or what work do they need to do to overcome that block? Because the consequence of the block, it makes sense to me. I get it. You're scared. You get, overwhelmed. You forget, whatever it is. It makes sense to me. But at the same time, it's not working. We got to figure something out here. And I want, to help you with that, but we got to figure something else out, because, it's getting in the way of the safety and closeness in our relationship. Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and stop there. And Thank you, Forrest, for that. That's really sweet. Um, I do wish you the best of luck in your next relationship. And it absolutely, this information will help you be successful in that. It's going into a relationship with this information is great because you're not having to do all this cleaning up stuff later. If I had my way, every couple out there that, you know, has decided to be in a committed relationship together, I would have them do a few couples therapy sessions just to understand, or read the book, whatever it is, just to understand their negative cycle, just to understand here's what our cycle is. If you've been together for any length of time, it's already taken on some energy. And here's how we can learn to keep it under wraps so it doesn't end up creating all this horrible mistrust later that is harder to get out of. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and I hope this was helpful. And so next week, we're going to go back to chapter 5. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about some strategies for interrupting these cycles when you get stuck in them. So thank you, everybody. And also forgot, tomorrow at Katrina, what time is it? I am doing a negative cycle workshop, which is just to help couples understand their negative cycle and map their negative cycle. So, Katrina, do you remember what time that is tomorrow? She's putting up the
Yes,
link.
it's at 8 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow.
Okay, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific tomorrow. So, and it's just an hour long. Okay, bye everybody.